a chance to bring it up last night in the meeting, so.
Okay.
You ready? All right, everybody, welcome to the mid-month Lawrence Douglas County Metropolitan Planning Commission meeting. We are starting a little late, but glad to be here. To go over the rules, I'm going to have Ellie talk about the rules of the meeting.
Good morning, Ellie Mullins, planner. I will be helping to facilitate the Zoom video portion of the meeting this morning. I will work alongside the vice chair to facilitate the meeting proceedings. I have a few housekeeping items for this hybrid meeting. This meeting is being recorded and broadcast on the city's YouTube channel and cable channel 25. Please remember to mute yourself during the meeting when you are not speaking. The chat function for this public meeting is disabled. All chats will go directly to me. Unless you are participating during the meeting, please turn your video off. This allows the active meeting participants to be seen on screen. You will still be able to hear the meeting. When you are participating, please turn your video on. If you have any trouble, you can send a chat to me. The city reserves the right to mute people or turn individual videos off to minimize distractions during the meeting. Now I will turn the meeting back over to the vice chair.
Thank you. And Becky, just can you give us a sense of the parameters of the meeting, the structure of the meeting, what we should, just.
Sure, yeah, so the topic for today are kind of a discussion about our bylaws. We had kind of started this discussion, I would say, at our Planning Commission orientation, so it's really kind of a continuation of that. This is a topic that's been, I think, that brought to us by you all as something that you wanted to have a continued discussion about. So staff hasn't prepared anything, no revised bylaws or anything that we have that we're prepared to kind of go over. This is really more just that continued discussion to help staff then, if we were going to make changes to the bylaws, what those might be. So just the kind of process would be, this is a discussion, there's no vote or anything like that that's going on here. Then later, if there's changes to the bylaws, those would be brought to you at one of your regular Planning Commission meetings where there'd be public hearing and a vote at that time.
So I'm just going to start off with the things that we've been talking about, and you guys jump in with other ideas. But I think the first thing that we've all spent a lot of time on is the fact that our meetings run late. So that's one issue. Another issue is that we get a lot of information at the last minute. So how can we find ways to better, consume that? So those are the two things that I've heard a lot about. I don't know if you guys want to add anything else or if there's things you guys want to talk about. But those are the two things that I thought we talk about.
There was an issue that was brought up at prior discussion about the ad hoc committees.
Yes, ad hoc as well.
Excuse me, and consent agenda.
Consent agenda. So,
Can I bring up something as well?
go ahead.
Please go ahead, Mike.
And it would be, why is this meeting during the normal working day?
The
I know it's
timing.
something we never brought up, but I think this will be the appropriate time to talk about it.
And when you say this meeting, are you talking about the mid-month or are you talking about?
The mid-month meeting specifically, it's during a work day.
Okay.
Prashant, I'd like to add one item for discussion, and that is the nature of a tie vote currently defaults to a no as it goes on. And as I've read through the bylaws, I don't see anything there that specifies that as a default outcome. I'd like to discuss changing that default to a no recommendation as opposed to a no recommendation when we split when we tie.
Got it. So, Commissioner Hayden, we're just going over. So it's just gonna be a discussion about our bylaws. We're not gonna vote today or anything like that. And so we've put a few items down, and we're just gonna, I think, talk about them. The first couple were our meetings running late. and getting a lot of material sort of at the last minute and how to handle that. Ad hoc committee, consent agenda. Why do we have the mid-month on a work day at this time? And then why shouldn't a tie vote be just that, and why should it be a no vote? So those are the things that we've so far discussed. Or not discussed, but we want to talk about today. And we only have, guys, we started late. It's 7:45. I'd like to finish by 8:30. It is a work day, as Commissioner Kelso said, so let's try to get something out of the meeting that we can use that's actionable.
Commissioner Berthon, just for,
sorry.
This meeting does it is scheduled till 9.
Till 9, okay, sorry, till 9, okay. Sorry about that. So do we just want to take it down the order that we listed? Do you guys have a preference? Does that sound like, in terms of like important, because we're probably going to spend a lot of time on a few things and then run out of time. So is that the number one thing, is like the meeting is running late and how much material we have to consume?
Yeah.
Yeah, start there? Okay. So yeah, does anybody have thoughts on how we can, either make our meetings not run late, or just any thoughts in general on how we can do a better job of trying to get our meetings done on time, or any suggestions, ideas, thoughts?
Well, we certainly can start earlier.
Start earlier? So if I read the bylaws correctly, it sounds like if we had to change the start time, we'd need a vote. The commission would have to vote. And if we had to vote, it would have to be a public meeting. So.
And then approved by the city and county commissions.
Approved by the city and county commissions.
Both or just one? Do you know?
They have to approve our bylaws?
Bylaw change, that's what it says in the bylaws, is that they have to approve our bylaw changes.
Okay.
I don't remember if it was one or both.
Yeah, I don't know if it was both city and, both? Both, okay.
For clarification, would you like the meeting, you're discussing starting the meeting early for particular, based on an agenda, or just in general, moving the start time up earlier?
In general, I would propose we start at 5:30, just an hour earlier.
So all meetings, not just like meetings.
I think maybe Jeff has something.
Nope, I just realized I wasn't on the mic there, I'm sorry.
Oh,
Yeah.
I don't want to mess up the audio, so I don't know.
all right.
Well, my first question, I know the city commission changed the time of their meeting, so there's precedent for that, but my first question is always, what does that do for staff in terms of getting set up, and the work time for staff would be my initial question.
Well, I think the easy answer for that one is we would escalate the entire day, which would mean you would probably see us moving towards unavailable sooner in the day as we're trying to get this room ready and get in process on that one. The other thing is the reason your time is always at 6:30 was to allow people from the county to have dinner and also come into the meeting. So that would truncate the amount of time people would have. If they got off at 5, they wouldn't have time to eat. They'd come directly here, or they would come late. So that was the reason for the 6:30 start time historically.
Would it be possible to, if we know something is going to be, controversial, or we know a lot of people are going to come, is there any way that we can, for that meeting, have a special start time? Or, like if we know like a month ahead of time or 2 months ahead of time, when the agenda is getting made, can we do something about, something like that?
Possibly, but quite truthfully, there's very few times we know that ahead of time.
I see.
It's very rare that we would have such notice that we'd be able to make that shift with about 60 days notice, so that you'd be able to vote on it in a meeting, make the change, and then have it advertised correctly. So I mean, that's kind of it's possible, I think. It's just we wouldn't be able to predict it very well.
I mean, like if you take the last year, so we've had, anytime wind comes up, anytime solar comes up, just, I predict that if they come up again, it's going to be the same kind of thing. I don't know, but you know what I mean? I mean, can we just say, okay, based on history,
We could take a look at that one. The other thing to remind everybody is that this room is the room you have to meet in because of the technology, and it's in such high use, there may not be 5:30 available at the same point in time. So the room might be in use till, right up until your meeting.
Won't know that until.
Right, so there's,
Know that 60 days ahead.
exactly, so there we don't have a sense of it. So you're, I won't say you're bound by those kind of generalities of a Monday and a Wednesday at 6:30, but I mean, effectively, the room is pretty well spoken for the rest of the year at least.
Yeah.
Could we, what would the level of difficulty be to add a third possible day? You don't use it, sometimes we don't even use, the two that we have, right, based on whatever's in front of us, but if we've got a heavy load, could we add a third day, add a Tuesday or a Thursday?
That's a possibility, but again, that would be a pretty high lift for staff to take and carry forward on that one. So that would be a pretty intense maneuvering. Again, the room may not be available. I don't know off the top of my head.
I have a question for staff. Certainly, the perspective of the current commissioner is informed by our experiences over the past year, but I'm curious, how much of an issue has a long meeting been in the past? Does that come up regularly, or is this, we just had a crazy string of big issues come before us?
That's a great question. 20, 30 years ago, you would have seen these meetings run really long for a really long time, but in recent times, these are probably more anomalies than the norm, quite honestly. You've probably just had an interesting stretch where there was an event that we couldn't have foreseen, and there was a big items that have been coming through just on your agenda. So it's probably more the outlier than the normal that we would see in your meetings. In the years that I've worked with the commission, and when they had the 11 o'clock ending time in place, it was maybe a couple times a year they would vote to extend the meeting, and that would just keep on continuing. So, I mean, it was usually not running into the 11 o'clock time in most instances.
Does it make sense to put back the 11 o'clock ending time and then perhaps go to the next, to another day, whether it be a Tuesday or Thursday or a Monday or a Wednesday the following week?
That's what I was gonna ask, kind of along those lines. What is the procedure for like pausing? Like we kind of talked about that. Sometimes you'll give us advice on that on the fly in the middle. What would be, could we do an 11 o'clock stop and then leave things where they are, like tabling and holding? I just don't know well enough to know what it would mean.
Yeah, we would need to write it in your bylaws a little bit better, because right now you don't have a lot of that item. You can defer an item, and then what that does, and then it will depend on if the item is quasi-judicial versus legislative and the way that it can be processed through and the way that it works. But you could table theoretically an item if it was in your bylaws. The thing, though, is the state statute would take hold, and you'd have to give 20-day notice for the thing to come back. So the soonest it would be able to come back would be your next meeting, very likely. But in all actuality is by the time your meeting, like we'll just use this month as an example, by the time you meet in March, we've already let your April one out. So the next time they'd come back is probably in May.
So there's tabling and there's deferring, and this is probably dumb, I really have no idea. There's no like, okay, it's 11 o'clock on Monday, we're pausing it and we'll pick this item up either Wednesday at the start of that meeting, or we'll meet again that week. We have the special third meeting of the month that Commissioner Rexford was talking about when needed, because we stopped at the 11 o'clock. Does that make sense? I don't know what that would be called. Like, I don't think you can pause. But
Yeah, traditionally the commission has always deferred those items instead of it, because what it is you have a clean break, because there may be an instance where the applicant's not available at the next available meeting, and then they want to bring it back 3 months on or 5 months on because they have a consultant flying in. And so that would give the deference to the applicant to say let us set this back when we've got our stuff ready versus when the planning commission is ready, because there may be other factors that we're not aware of from their standpoint. The reason, and I can kind of slightly recall this at 7 something in the morning here, The reason the planning commission didn't like the 11 o'clock time was because of that reason, because if we had public that had taken the time to be here and sat through the meeting, or the applicant had brought staff to the meeting, they didn't want them to then walk away feeling like they hadn't been heard and had gone through all the effort for no reason. And so that's the reason why you saw the commission kind of take that off their bylaws at that point to, have that equity to that. If you've made the effort to come here, we would love to hear from you, kind of an output on that one. Now, the other discussion the commission's had over the years is the efficiency of the meetings. And so not so much about the beginning and the ending time, but kind of go with the bluntness of this one. Are we at the right level? Are we asking the questions that we should be asking? Have we gone into the point of doing staff's job? And that's maybe a debate, maybe that is a question the commission would like to debate this morning, is the efficiency of the procedure that you have in place, not just the time. So there's a lot of things you can do with your bylaws. I can't promise the room is available. I can't promise a third meeting because I don't know what that looks like. I also don't know what that looks like to have staff available, because that would downshift all of our administrative applications to get ready for a third meeting. So that would put a lot of burden on staff that's already pretty taxed. But anything's possible. Just don't know the details for it off the top of my head.
I can speak a little bit to the efficiency of the meeting. As I know in meetings past, not all the commissioners would say something. And actually, that was more of a, well, we don't understand what their vote is. And so now, most everybody on the commission now is willing to speak and say why. So and that's a good thing. But that has extended the meetings a little bit. But that's, in my mind, a good thing, that everybody will speak to why it is they're voting as they are. And I wouldn't want to cut that off. Because prior to having very quiet commissioners, you just didn't know where the vote was coming from.
I completely agree with you, Sharon. As I think about the meeting and how we progress through that, I can say that, Jeff's question about, are we at the right level all the time? The answer is we get into things not land use. We'll frequently get into things that are really questioning, that's not the right word, trying to clarify or get into what staff's work is on a particular item. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that if there's an error, if our judgment says that there's something wrong on that. But my sense is that we could, as a group, tighten our meetings up if we focused only on the land use questions and the criteria that our decisions are based on.
I guess I struggle to understand what that means. I kind of hate to tell people they can't ask questions that they find
me too.
important or that they think are important to their decision. I also, I still struggle with what exactly is the planning commissioner's role, and I've had different conversations with different staff over the last several months, and I do think it's my understanding that it is our job to ask the hard questions and to dive into the material. And I definitely know the public comment and things that I didn't know much about, I've had to look into. And I think all of that's really important. And I wouldn't want to do anything to suggest that we shouldn't be investigating that kind of stuff, because
I completely agree with you. I completely agree. And I wouldn't, and I hope that I don't create an environment, currently as chair, that we don't feel that we can ask the questions or go where we want to go or where we think we need to go. All I'm saying is that each of us as individuals, as we do our work, making that differentiation between land use and something not land use, I have found, looking at it always through the lens of the criteria on which we're supposed to make those decisions, a great way to help me understand which paths really are land use and which paths may be something else. Not as a hard limit, but as a guide.
Question for, I guess, for Jeff and for staff. which, as we're talking, as the possibility of say a third meeting has been brought up as a way to alleviate potentially ultra long meetings, which causes a bigger upheaval in staff's day to day. Is it go until 3 a.m. on a Monday or Wednesday, knowing that the next day is going to be less productive, just simply because people are tired? Or would it be stopping at, say, around 11 p.m. and adding a third meeting day? Which one, and this is just a guess on your part, it's just an estimate, which one it would be more disruptive, assuming that the room was even available?
Commissioner Kelso, that's a great question. I feel like you're asking me which toe would I like to stub on the chair. In all honesty, probably spinning up a third meeting, because the amount of logistics it takes to get the room ready, to get staff prepared, and get everything going is so intensive during the days of your meeting that if we would just to continue the meeting and not have to do the logistics, it would actually be lighter on staff in my estimation.
Is there a possibility of, so the county commission recently is holding a special meeting for a particular topic. Is there anything that we can do along those directions, where if we know there's a particular issue coming up and we just call a special meeting at that time for that particular issue?
You do have the ability to call special meetings, but the way that it works is you still have to give 20 days notice, and it has to go to publication. So what very would be is you'd have a special meeting right in front or right after your standing meetings. And so it's because of that 20-day noticing requirement, you're almost always going to be overlapping one of your other meetings.
Hasn't the county chosen a Saturday for their special meeting?
Yeah.
Is there any reason we couldn't do that?
Yeah, I think you'd have a hard time getting staff available, and on top of that, the overtime costs that we would incur as part of that would be a very expensive meeting to operate.
Couldn't we operate that as instead of Friday that week? Some other day?
We're getting into questions about personnel and operations, and it would be somebody working out of hours, and it would be a pretty expensive meeting to lift.
I know we talk about staff and scheduling rooms. I think my focus has been on the public's ability to be here and have their voices heard when we meet till 3 in the morning, or we meet till 1 in the morning, or we meet till midnight. I think essentially, I feel we are excluding public input when we do that. Could all of us stay till midnight or 1? Well, we have. We've shown we have. But I know many people have said, I can't do this. I can't wait. I have to work tomorrow. I have kids at home. So it isn't just room scheduling. It isn't just the decrease in quality of discussion. It is, are we really serving the public that we are supposed to serve when we meet these late hours? And I don't think we are. In my opinion, we are not meeting public expectations by doing that. Are there any, I don't know there are any good answers to this. There may be less bad answers to what we can come up with. But I think a change somehow has to be made. And I, quite frankly, don't know what that change is.
Well, I think you hit it, the crux of the problem there, Chair, is that either way we go, it's going to inconvenience someone. So for some people staying the late, we don't get to hear their voices because they leave. Sometimes if we were to reschedule another meeting, they can't come that next meeting. They can't come 2 or 3 times for the same issue. So it just, either way, we're going to essentially disenfranchise somebody.
Which is the least bad is kind of where we've come to.
If I may, if it's the Vice Chair's prerogative on this one, Sandy and I may be some of the longest standing Planning Commission participants that we've got here, and I think Sandy would agree with me on this one. In very old days, it was very common for the Planning Commission to hit a point and go, you know what, we're deferring this because we just need that extra time. We need people to have that ability. We need them to have the notice upon when to return back. And it wasn't uncommon that an item would get deferred and deferred and deferred and deferred. There's one instance I can think of, there was an applicant that was deferred 8 times because the item ran so long and they didn't want to have that, to Commissioner Thomas, to your point, to not have that common, but they wanted it to be where people knew they could, make the time and have the notice to be able to make that time available to do it. So there is some times where you may want to get into an item that doesn't have an applicant, like an amendment, or may have a thing. They may be, or actually the applicant may prefer a deferment, so that they have that time to have that discussion or continue those conversations. So I would, while I'm cautious about, there may be people that are bringing in consultants, it may also be warranted for that to have that defer, because then you could allow for the comment to continue, or also allow for time for you all to sit and think through the information you heard and be able to take that all in, because I'm sure it's, and again, having never been a planning commissioner, but sometimes it can be hard for me to take all that information in one night, and maybe having some time to reflect on it would be beneficial to you all too.
But Jeff, deferment is you restart everything the next time, right?
Typically, yeah. And that's something we can look at your bylaws. If that is a concern of the commission that you don't want to do it, that may be something we could fine tune in your bylaws. Because typically, and not to skip ahead to one of Commissioner Rexrod's items in there, a lot of your voting and your procedures are actually governed by whatever land use code you're operating within, not your bylaws. Your bylaws only give you the option to defer. Your vote outcomes and some of the procedural things are governed by the county zoning code or the city's land development code or the subdivision regulations. So there's a lot of nuance that goes into that, and we can take a look and get into that as part of that review. So I just wanted to throw that out there for food for thought this morning.
Sorry, I had a point of clarification. When you say we could look at that, are you talking about looking at deferral in the bylaws, or are you talking about us looking at the other things that govern us?
Be looking at the bylaws,
Yeah.
because deferrals are governed under your bylaws. You're voting,
Double-checking,
yep.
some of the other things are not in the bylaws, so they're not really up to us to consider or to change, because they're in the code.
Correct. So like voting procedures would be a code item, but your bylaws, deferrals are in your bylaws.
So not that I would necessarily remember it, but what would be one where you said we've deferred and deferred and deferred? What would an example of that previous planning commissioners did?
One of my all-time favorites would be the Hy-Vee at Castle and Clinton Parkway. I think it was deferred 9 times before it was approved. So there's been a lot of history of items that have come up and have, had a good 2 hours of discussion. The commission goes, you're not going to get this one tonight. We've got other things to do. Let's defer this one. We'll pick it up and come back to it again.
That almost seems, like, I think maybe we need to investigate it a little bit more, but that seems to be getting at really what we're trying to do. If we can figure out the procedure to do that without opening everything back up all the time, because then you're just having another 8-hour meeting, or making sure the applicant has an opportunity to participate in that, and then the public also. I think I had marked down one of the things to look at was deferral. Jane had mentioned it at one of our mid-months, like, what is the procedure for deferral, and can people use deferral to their strategic advantage? And so I had actually been kind of interested in looking at that as well, and I noticed on there, I think it said the standard was higher than I had remembered it being. So maybe we look, severe hardship, I think, is what, and I feel like we have deferred things without necessarily discussing severe hardship and what that means. I don't know, I'd have to go back and look at their meetings. So I was kind of surprised by that language as well. So maybe deferral is what we look at, like, what is the motion to deferral? What is the timing on something like that? What is the standard for deferral? And then what is the commission's ability to defer at certain stages? I think my concern there would be, I would just want to make sure that it was done at a stage where everyone felt like they were able to be heard. And I don't know how, that would have to be part of the discussions to figure out do we put something like that in, or do you just kind of wait for the situation to arise and then have the conversation and the vote based on the situation that is?
I'd ask us to add a specific consideration for the impact on applicants when we choose to make a deferral. They bear costs that we don't typically discuss or take into consideration at the time of those decisions. We'll oftentimes, ask an applicant if they would prefer to defer, and I think in most cases that I can remember, they've said no unless it gave them a better opportunity to get to a yes on a vote. But all I'm saying is that they have costs. There's a significant burden on them. I just ask us to consider that when we think about the criteria for deferral for the sake of meeting timelines.
That's an excellent point, actually. Jeff, I don't know if the history of how deferral has been used, and you're talking about the 9 times for Hy-Vee. I don't know if we can look at anything in the past and figure out why it worked then and why it might not now, because perhaps costs are, there's just more costs, or perhaps costs were a concern then and it just wasn't taken in consideration, because I think that would concern me, to add a financial burden.
Anecdotally, I will say that I think cost has always been there for applicants, because you're always going to have a carrying cost with the land. You're always going to have an option that you may need to extend. You're always going to have those kind of things out there, which is why I think the commission has kind of historically moved more towards what you're seeing today, because there's a lot of costs that you don't see that come up as part of that. You'd have, thinking through a conversation I had with somebody not too long ago, between the option for the property, the construction escalation costs, the change of inflation, and then the cost of keeping the consultants on board escalated too, because they were on demand on another project, and all of those costs started to incur at a much higher rate the longer it went, and so they were very sensitive to that. So, I mean, previously, one of the things that we saw was the commission would ask the applicant, how does this affect you? Knowing that it's not so much a question of the land use or a question of it, but trying to understand is, if we do this, what happens to you? Because it's easy for you all to move to defer and vote for it, but then that ripple effect is somewhere else. So Commissioner Thomas is right. It's the best of a bunch of bad options in some degrees on that one. So it's it cuts both ways in totality. It just matters what you want.
And it's up to us. Sorry.
Go ahead.
So, and it's up to the commission to vote. Like, the applicant doesn't really have a say. We ask the applicant's opinion. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? Or
Prashant, I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. No, I'm just asking if it's entirely up to the commission, or if the applicant has a say in the deferral. Like, can we just decide we want to defer it, even if it's bad for the applicant, right? Even if the applicant doesn't want it.
It's the commission's prerogative to make a motion and vote on it. It's just you would do it with the knowledge of certain things that it may happen to the applicant. And again, that assumes that there's an applicant on the other side of that application. For a text amendment, there may not be an applicant. Right. And so time may not be nearly of the essence as the case of a special use permit or a conditional use permit. So.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Article 5, Sections 2B and 2C are what lay out the deferrals. And I don't see that there's any change that needs to be made in either one of those. I think it's a good thing to be talking about it. But I do think that those planning commission meetings are public meetings, and I don't think they're just for the convenience of the applicant. The applicant has had a lot of time working with staff, getting the item to the point where they want to present it.
Yeah.
And then I think it makes sense to go ahead and defer it if it would cause some kind of hardship, absolutely. But unless it's a hardship, I think it shouldn't be just a little bit of playing for, well, the commissioner I know who's going to support it isn't here at this meeting, so I want to defer it and make sure I get the right commissioner back. I think that it's possible to play those kinds of games, and I don't think it's appropriate.
And again, defer means 20 days. So like, I know that I keep coming back to this, can we hit pause button? And it's not really gonna work. But I'm just thinking like, the way that it's written, yes, like, so there's the cost, and 20 days, and then there's gonna be a huge cost. But I'm just trying to think, is there some kind of way in which we can get the parties, if it's been noticed, and is there a point in the procedure, maybe this is a Randy question, but is there a point in the procedure where public comment has closed, the applicant's response is closed, and so we could, I don't know, table's not the right word, but we could pause it and then come back for the discussion portion of it. And so technically, yes, it would be like a deferral, but it's not a deferral in the sense that we're opening no one's foreign shopping really, because what they've said is gonna be said and whatnot. I guess you do have the addition of different commissioners who may be there when you get back together again. But is there any kind of way to do that in a shorter time frame than the 20 days, or which in essence ends up being at least 2 meetings away, to cut down on that cost for the applicant?
We can look. I don't know the answer.
Is that a Randy question?
I think it's probably something for us to explore with Randy and go through the details on to understand what it is there, because your bylaws are what you run under, and because your bylaws don't have a lot of that procedural nuance, I guess is the best way to describe it. I don't know the answers, because you really have strict deferral language in Section 5, or Article 5, excuse me. And beyond that, it's a matter of procedure, because you start getting into questions about what application type are you hearing, and how are you sitting as the board? Are you sitting as a legislative body, or are you sitting as a quasi-judicial body? And that changes some of those procedural aspects.
Well, and I think 2C does handle that, where the commission can go ahead and defer it, but everything has been done.
Well, I guess what I was trying to think is when we do this, though, it's my understanding that it's at least, there's a new notice period, so there's at least 20 days. But what that actually ends up meaning then is that it's 2 months, because we already have the agenda for the next one. So I was just wondering if there's anything we could write in here that would say that you can defer it and take it, or maybe it's not called deferring, but you do something where then you can take it up with either, because everyone, public has had an opportunity to speak, the applicant is done speaking, then maybe you can take it up with some 5-day public notice or some other kind of public notice, or to shorten that time frame, only because I'm thinking about the costs for the applicant. Once that is all closed, right?
If the public hearing is all closed and the applicant is closed, then the applicant just needs to hear what our decision is, what our discussion and decision is. And at that point, they don't need to be in the room with their consultants. It can all be handled by Zoom if they want to handle it that way. But I think it is something that would be helpful to have Randy look at. But I thought a deferral could be just to the next meeting, that it wouldn't require a separate new notice.
Historically, what happened was, because you met on Mondays and not on Wednesdays, we had that time to beat the legal out. So if you did a motion on a Monday, the legal didn't typically leave. But right now, with you meeting on a Wednesday, the legal leaves in advance of your meeting. That change from a standing Monday meeting to a standing Wednesday meeting shifts that calendar off in the way that the noticing works and the way that we have to get it to the newspaper. So back when Planning Commission met on Mondays, there was the possibility of us potentially going quick out of an item and getting something quickly into a legal and then getting it published for the next meeting. But because you meet on a Wednesday, we typically let that out on, Tuesday, if I remember right. And so you meet on a Wednesday, you defer an item, that legal's gone. And so that means that next month is already out of kilter, and that means we're down 60 days. So that the change in the commission's practice of having the business meeting primarily on a Wednesday from primarily on a Monday shifted that ability from our calendars.
What was the reason for that change, Jeff? Is that something we could just go back to give us more flexibility?
The reason for that, if I remember correctly, and this is going to be a memory test for me, is because the commission wanted more time between when the packet was let out and more time to review it. Because what would happen is we would typically let the packet Tuesday-ish, Wednesday, depending upon how the internet was behaving. and then you'd have the weekend, and then Monday you'd go right into it. But the case of what you have now is we let it Tuesday, Wednesday, you have about a full 7 days before you come back to the meeting. So that was the intent of that one. The other side of that one that the commission liked was it also gave people that were going to provide correspondence a little bit of time between when the packet would get updated, they would have some time to possibly review it. But that's, that's not probably panned as the commission thought initially.
Those are all good things.
So can we, so I think the takeaway from this is like, use the deferral process. It seems, the word I heard the most is, consider deferral as a way to deal with long meetings, is what I'm hearing us say.
Or at least investigate the possibility
of,
if it can be used as a tool more effectively to help with the
Yeah.
efficiency. Knowing that the balance of the concerns is making sure we're not creating a forum shopping or a strategic situation to the best of our ability, making sure we're not cutting off public comment or reopening public comment, making sure the applicant could potentially not need to be present, right, because they're done speaking and it's about the commission having its discussion and making it about a lot of things to
Right.
balance and consider and think about. But I think those would have to be considered if deferral is gonna be and a shorter notice time, a shorter ability to get the item back in front of us, even if it was a special meeting or
Right.
a third meeting or something.
So then I'm going
That's interesting.
sorry, go ahead, Chair Exler.
So that's interesting what Chelsea just said. I wonder if there's it may be code, I'm not sure, is it by law that has a certain number of days required for the posting. If we've moved our meeting from Monday to Wednesday for all very good reasons, could we change the number of days required in between that meeting to allow it to happen? The other thing that was brought up that might be something we could change in the bylaws would be to change how we define the outcome of a deferral, where we don't start the whole thing over again, but we can effectively table something until the time the meeting's picked back up. Have that as an option.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think all those are options. I just very hesitant to create something where we're in the middle of public comment or applicant comment. And it seems inappropriate to kind of be messing around with that and adding extra time in between when something gets started and when at least that portion of it is closed. That would be my only concern.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And does that mean we ought to consider putting a stop hour in our bylaws?
I think just this discussion is that's sort of a arbitrary. To have a stop time would be somewhat arbitrary. If we use these other tools that are
It
possible.
would be helpful in terms of using the other tools, because when we've gone late, it has been our discussion that has gone late. It hasn't been the public input. And I didn't know if there was kind of a reminder, okay, we've got a stop time, so we can use our deferral now. I didn't know if that would be helpful.
I see.
I think I'm concerned about the stop time only because what if the stop time appears and the public comment or the applicant period hasn't stopped, it hasn't finished, right? So what if we're in the middle of that and then we hit that time? I just think that would create other issues that I also think we would have to consider once that process happens. New information, we had this come up before. What about new information? It seems to me if the public comment is closed and the applicant's presentation is closed and their rebuttal is closed, how do we handle that? And sometimes people send public comment again after that period, and I really think, and that needs to be taken into consideration, and commissioners meeting or talking with public and the applicant, and it does open up cans of worms that we don't currently have.
That,
I think that when there was a stop time, there was also the provision that the commission could extend that by a majority vote.
Correct. And the other side of that was they also didn't stop mid-process. So if they were in the middle of public comment, they would wrap public comment and then they would close down. Typically, I mean, they would, I don't think it was I can't remember that bylaw from back in the day, but I mean, the practice always was if they were like midstream public comment, they just ran public comment out, then they would contemplate the ending of the item. And Commissioner Hayden, to your point there, that is the reason why the commission's always preferred deferrals, is because if you defer the item and you're re-noticing it, then the people have the chance to provide the comment, you have the ability to declare ex parte again at the beginning of the next meeting. So that kind of gives you a very clean break and carryover, so you know exactly how to conduct going forward on that versus a continuance where you have that pause effectively in place. So that's an excellent point that I had failed to mention earlier.
Yeah, I think I just talked myself out of supporting a deferral.
What were the problems with the hard stop? Was there, just.
I can share an example
Yeah, please.
that, just for your consideration, doesn't necessarily mean this is something that would occur here, but it could be an instance where you have someone makes a motion to extend, and that motion is let's extend to 15 minutes. Well, then 15 minutes comes a lot faster than you anticipate, and then you know another vote, and it just keeps, that in itself can sometimes add extra time to the meeting to have to go through motions and votes to extend the meeting. So just depending on how, if someone voted, if the vote to extend was approved, just by how far out could have some implications on timings of meetings too.
Sure.
Yeah, I remember that from years past. It was, I came in at the tail end of when we would vote or to extend, and it sort of just dragged it out.
So I'm looking at the clock, and we have about 35 minutes left, so I want to try to hit as many of these things as we can. So the next thing that I wanted us to talk about is, so I think you mentioned it.
Before we do that,
Sorry, go ahead.
so where did we leave this then?
So I think
On the-
Jeff has taken, we're going to have to talk about or find out what our options are as far as deferral. You know, what are the, like, public notice and deferral? Jeff?
Yeah, my takeaway from this one was to have a further discussion with Randy and the city attorney's office on what deferral looks like, what the procedure is, and see if there's a way to fine tune that, or, you know, what is the best practice to continue on with that one. So something for us to research and bring back for more discussion and consideration.
Okay.
And would we still have to vote with that? That would be a bylaw change, you think, or we could do that without changing the bylaws?
Any bylaw motion you would take would have to occur at a business meeting. It would have to be by vote.
By vote, okay. Okay, so that's
Okay,
that's our takeaway. Thank you. And then, so the next thing, and Commissioner Ashworth, you brought this up, is we're all talking a lot more now in our discussion. And Commissioner Eldridge, you mentioned that usually is what ends up taking a lot of time is, you know, public comment is done, and then we all are very thoughtful and bring a lot of different life experience, and we want to say what we want to say, but is there a way that we can be efficient with that? Like, you know, I think we spend a lot of time kind of maybe asking questions that could have been asked earlier. Maybe there's a, you know, we spend time kind of looking up stuff during the meeting. Are there ways that we can just have it be discussion as opposed to looking up stuff, or, you know, maybe there's stuff we can clarify from staff prior, so all we're doing at the meeting is just discussing, not looking up. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Like, to make our discussions more efficient so that we're not spending the time clarifying, but just discussing, right? You know, is there a way that we can ask staff ahead of time? So anyway, I'll just put it on the table. Is there a way for us to make our discussions more efficient, is my question. Because I think I agree with you. I think we spend a lot of time, we're taking up a bulk of the time, which is good, but I feel like we don't have to spend time on stuff that maybe we could have done beforehand, you know?
Except that some of what we hear from the public generates the questions that we would not have had previously.
Right.
Because we hadn't heard what they have to say.
True.
And I think that's very important, to be able to follow up on what somebody says at a meeting.
Right.
I also think that's a key part for the next body that's actually making the decision.
Yeah.
because our discussion is very valuable for them. Because we may not make a decision based on that, but they'll hear that and think, oh, because they're the policy body.
Right.
So if we're even discussing something that may or may not be focused on the criteria, as Commissioner Rexroad mentioned, our discussion does inform the policymakers.
Right.
So the thing I wonder about, the sort of actually concrete thing that's been brought up in terms of length of meetings is the potential of a consent agenda. And that's something staff already is looking into, and I think
Right.
that's a very promising
Right.
thing to have. So there, we wouldn't have a discussion, it'd be just vote.
Right, just vote, yeah.
I think Sharon said it. I think the discussion that we have, whether it appears to be on topic that you are referring to, is probably the most important thing that we do. When other commissioners say things, when we're talking among ourselves and hearing what the public has said, reading what the staff has said, is probably the most important thing. And to limit that, I
guess I'm not suggesting we limit that. I'm just wondering if there's stuff that, some of that can happen beforehand, right? So we have these big documents. We have like 100 pages that we have to consume before our meeting. And so if there are questions that staff can address prior to the meeting that are going to make no difference, because it's just, we have a doubt and we need some kind of clarification. Let's get that before the meeting. So when the meeting is going on, we sort of have all of the questions that we need answered, and now it's just discussion based on what the public have brought to us or what we have, brought up as issues. You know what I'm trying to say?
I think I know what you were saying. I think so many of the good things, well, a couple of things. One, when you get 3,400 pages 4 days before we meet,
Yeah.
there's no way to digest it, get back to the powers that be and have those questions answered. So that's an issue that we are going to look at. That's one of the things we were going to look at. But it's also the discussion that other commissioners bring things up that I have certainly not think about, that trigger things in me that I think probably bring out the best in all of us. So getting the information early, having access to the staff, and then the discussion among ourselves and hearing what the public has said, I think it's just critical. And are there questions that I've had in the past that I could call Jeff or Sandy or Becky and get answered? Perhaps there are. But I think all of this ties together with getting the information early, getting our questions answered, so we can make the best decision that we can is vitally important.
I will say, I like that idea. So after our last orientation, I've been consulting my orientation packet a lot more than the first year. I apologize. But I did notice in there one of the things was to ask staff questions ahead of time if you have them. And so I've been trying to do a little bit more of that. And it has been helpful. I think a couple of things. I also don't know if I'm burdening staff, right? So I think it'd be good to know about staff's, because that could just be adding an extra burden. And then there is the understanding that we're getting it all pretty darn quickly, right? And like Charlie said, it's really hard to turn it around in that. So my questions might be Sunday night, like as I'm looking through it, right? And then I had a long list of questions. at one point, and I didn't hear back, which is absolutely fine, because I wasn't sure if I would. And I noticed staff had incorporated some of my questions into the staff report and made some changes. And so I think that was efficient, right? But at the same time, there wasn't really communication between staff and I, and I wasn't sure whether those would be answered. And so I think those are the things that, and then I also was just wonder, so nobody else really knows I asked those, which I'm fine with, but should that be something that like other commissioners know I had those questions? So I wasn't sure about that. So I think there's a lot of really good things to do, and I appreciate being able to talk to staff ahead of time. But sometimes I feel like I'm just a burden to them, right? And so it's kind of that balance.
So if a planning commissioner asks us a question, what we'll typically do is we won't respond to one of you, we send it to all, and we'll include it in the packet. If it's not something that's just like a technical question, typically the response is that is the protocol that we typically follow, because we want you all to have the same exact information at the same exact time. Sometimes we don't respond because we don't have the ability to get to it in time, and we will respond from the podium as we're having the discussion. So that's a very likely thing that'll happen. The other thing that has happened, at least in my career, is I will get a question that I already had in the presentation, and so I won't respond because I don't want someone to have the information in advance because it was already loaded in the presentation. I was going to give it anyway. And so what you'll see happen is if it's something like that, is if we get a question from one of you, we will send it to all of you because we want you all to have the same information at that point in time. So if somebody's asking it, we want you all to have it. So that's the protocol that we will tend to follow, unless we happen to just have it loaded up and ready to have that discussion at the presentation, then we just, have to hang on to it for a minute. So it's fine to ask staff questions. I also say it's fine to ask us questions from the podium when we're up there, because we understand that sometimes something won't click until you hear something or something comes up, and that's absolutely okay. And we do a lot of preparation to get ready for those kind of questions. So if, we're standing at the podium and we say something and then you're like, oh, I need to ask that. That is exactly fine. It doesn't have to always be in advance of the thing. So.
And I do think that it helped. It was a little bit more efficient. But then again, like I felt weird, then I was like, well, the other commissioners don't know that I had like 12 questions that I asked, right? And so I just don't know that. But I think we'd have to have a discussion about that. Like, what do we expect of one another? And then also making sure we're not burdening. So I don't want it to become the protocol is that we all send 20 questions to staff the night before, right? Like, that's not going to be helpful. None of them will come to work Monday morning. So I don't know where the balance is with it.
And I appreciate
Go ahead,
that.
Jeremy.
I've never felt when I've asked staff, you have said, Jeff said, just come in, I'm available whenever you have a question. And I have always thought that was honest when I have had a question.
We try to make that a priority because we know you all are getting that on quick information and may need to have a conversation or have some questions on that one. So that's a priority for us. When we go from the packet going out to when you all are reading it, that's what we try to do is keep the calendars clear and be responsive to help out. One of my all-time favorite questions I got very frequently was, will I see a site plan? Or what, it was those questions about degrees of where's the commission at, where is staff engaged at, and those kind of things. And those are maybe ones we send out to everybody because it's not, it's more of just can you clarify where we're at in the hierarchy of stuff? And those are common, and that's okay.
And I might also add to this discussion too, that you all might have some questions that it wasn't information that was included in your staff report, that you have that question because you want that additional information but it might take some research or it's not something that we have just at the ready. So asking that question before the meeting, we may not be able to get the answer to you all before the meeting, but we can be prepared to answer it at the meeting. So that can be helpful in situations like that.
Is there, I know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So Commissioner Thomas said, you've been very welcoming when he has a question. Would it be difficult to just have a Q&A, 30 minutes with all of us and you prior to our Monday meeting?
Yes, that would be a Kansas open meeting requirement. And you'd be,
I will step in here. That used to be what the Monday meeting was. The Monday meeting back in the day was a study session, and staff would give a very brief overview of the project. We would do a full presentation. Commission would ask a number of questions. If there was additional documentation that you were looking for, we would try to be prepared then for the Wednesday hearing. You did not take any actions on that Monday meeting. We served you dinner. And then, you know, it was usually a couple of hours, and then we went into, and the thought was that that was going to make the Wednesday meeting more efficient. That was also the time when we were pretty regularly going till 1 and 2 in the morning, or we would have commissions doing this. I'd like to extend the meeting for 15 minutes. Talk. I'd like to extend the meeting for 15 minutes. You know, it's like, just extend the meeting for an hour and let's be done with this, because it would take time to do this 15-minute increment thing. And I don't know who started the 15-minute thing. It was annoying. But that was what the Monday study session was.
Yeah.
And then as things started to change and we needed more time, we started publishing for items to be taken up on that Monday.
Sure.
I like the, oh, sorry, Jane.
I've had the privilege of reading staff reports and watching planning commission meetings for a very long time. And I remember sitting in on watching commissioners have dinner and staff do their presentation. Over this time, I think that the staff reports have become fabulous. They are much fuller. They are anticipating many more questions. And Tandy, you've been one of the ones who I've watched over these years, and I just think they're great. Which brings me to the question of, the presentations are also great, but if we've read the staff reports, could the staff presentations be any shorter?
Yes, and in all honesty, we sometimes don't give the presentations for your benefit. We give the presentations for the benefit of the public. So it's a double-edged sword on those things. We've, had discussions, and one of the things staff is getting tired of hearing me say is we're going to start, cutting down maybe how many pages of staff reports we write, because you all don't maybe need 15 pages when 7 will do, and the public's not going to follow 15 pages at the same rate. So it's a matter of balancing that out. It's the one opportunity we kind of have to do in education, kind of, introduce the topic to someone who may not have read all the staff reports, which I only guess maybe some people do, some people don't. So it's a matter of we have that discussion of, like, how do we balance that to kind of make sure that we not just get the information you need, but then the public that you're going to engage with has the same information and has that knowledge to be able to have a discussion with you. So it's a hard thing to balance. It's something we always take a look at is how much can we put in there before we start to be overburdened. And so, you also see us, we'll add in your decision-making criteria as probably typically your last slide or your second to last slide typically as part of that. And that's not just for your benefit, but that's also for the public's benefit, so they can see what you're making decisions on, because I would hazard that most of them don't read the code, and I'm not sure I would wish that on them, quite honestly, because well, y'all seen it. It's pretty hefty. So we just put those decision-making criteria in that last slide to help them out along the way too. So Commissioner Eldridge, excellent point. It's just a matter of how do we balance that out, both as what we're doing with the city as an overall item, but also with the knowledge that does, 5 more minutes of presentation over 5 items is about another 30 minutes in a meeting. So how do we balance that out in totality? So it's something we're very cognizant of too.
Thank you.
So the takeaway for this one is we're going to bug Jeff before the meeting.
That's my takeaway.
My takeaway is still not having enough time when the packet comes out on a Wednesday, not having enough time to look at it and make a decision, to analyze that packet. I don't care whether it's 3,400 pages long or 34 pages long. And in the biggest packets that we've had, can we not get that information streamed to us bit by bit as it comes in, instead of, boom, it's all dropped on us at once, and then one of the things that happened. We got another 150 pages on one of the things at 2:30 in the afternoon. And if I don't go to my email at 2:30 in the afternoon, when I have to leave home at 5:30 to get here by 6:30, I just think it is a disservice, and I'm not blaming staff, it is a disservice to the public for us to make decisions when we have not had the opportunity to look at all of the information and think about it.
I think that's also, though, a concern, not just about us being able to look at it, but also the public being able to look at it. So, I mean, we have a different role and we need to like comb through it all a lot more, but I don't know how one, because you have to wait till the documents are final. Like if things come out piecemeal, like there were a couple things where it was difficult for me to know which version I was looking at, right? And I think we don't want to create a situation where trickling it out, then we don't know what we're looking at or if it's been updated since. So there'd have to be some kind of, it have to be correspond with a deadline, right, for the final documents to be posted. So I think it's probably a little bit more of a staff explaining to us. That might be my alarm. I apologize.
There is an equity issue with the information and the way that we give it out. We give it to you at the same point we give it to the public because we don't want anybody to have a head start or have information in advance where you're asking questions that, there is that equity of it. So that's why you see us release everything and try to be in one go, short of the publication, or the communication deadline. Then we'll update as we go along there, or if I hope that's real wood, but occasionally the internet does not agree with us and iCompass won't behave correctly, and then Denny's got to do something that I don't even understand with iCompass, and then it somehow publishes. I don't have a clue what goes on. There's a gremlin in there occasionally. So sometimes you'll see us get 95% of it out, and then some reason one of them gets hung up or gets, I don't know, something happens. So we try to get that out, but we don't want you all to be getting information ahead of time because then you may have ask some questions that put you in a compromised position where you have to recuse or declare an ex parte, then have to abstain from an item. So we want to make sure that you have the ability to vote, but we also don't want the public to then feel like, well, they got something in advance, they know something else, they're already making up their minds, and so the public then has an expectation that you're doing something that is not above board and in requirements with the open meetings and the open records rules. And so that's why you see us cut those things loose in big chunks in the way that we do them.
Is there any, what would the downside be to changing the cutoff dates? So for example, rather than 10 o'clock on the morning of the first meeting, the cutoff was Friday from before. Just make it up.
Typically in conversations I've had is that most neighborhood associations and groups will meet on the weekend because they don't have time during the week. So they might meet on a Saturday or a Sunday, then prepare the comments for submission on the Monday. So that gives them time to also have time to do it. Because if we cut it loose on a Tuesday and you only have a couple hours after work, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday before you have, or Wednesday and Thursday before you have to respond back, that may not give them time to get you comments where you find that could be beneficial.
All right, so that's great, fair. What about sliding the entire calendar back a week? Leave our meetings where they are, but have all the other staff reports, everything else done and ready by that time.
That would elongate your 60-day calendar to probably 75 to 80 days. And so someone would be submitting 3 months before they would submit to arrive at your desk potentially.
So,
It's just all bad answers, isn't it?
well, I guess I struggle to see actually why that is bad. So I have felt recently like this seems like a very rushed process. And so I am curious as to why the timing is what it is in the sense of like having time to meet with staff and to talk to staff. And sometimes getting the feeling that staff also is on a pretty tight turnaround and deadline. So why is that a bad thing? Why not have an applicant file something and have an opportunity for staff to have more time to work on a project and then have the documents presented to us with more time to read them and look at them, and the public more time to go over them, particularly some of the stuff that is just so important for our community, and some of the stuff that is just very detailed and huge files and different types of documents that not planning commissioners and the public aren't necessarily used to looking at. So having the public have an opportunity to dive into what is being presented so that they can actually provide good public comment. Like, I guess I don't see what is wrong with like actually having the application process take a little bit longer if it means everybody has time to be just a little bit more responsible with their particular role and have time to get it done.
Time cost would be effectively it to the applicant, because instead of being, I mean, most planning commissions work on 30-day calendars. You're a bit odd, you work on a 60-day calendar, and if you push to a 90-day calendar, someone would submit in January, wouldn't land to your consideration till April. So that's 90 days. They would have to have all the drawings done, completed, ready, and then it'd be kind of at a stalling point. So there is that opportunity cost to the applicant on that one. The other
Holding costs.
The other bit of it is there's some things we probably put in your packet that, you know, are mainly a staff reviewing item, like the traffic impact study. I don't think any of us would say is we expect you to review line by line a traffic impact study and go through it. That's why we have County Public Works and the city engineer do that. So it's probably a question of when we're looking at the land development code update is, are we actually asking for the right information as part of your consideration package, or are we overloading that ask early on and they're providing information that is probably not at a point where it's going to be manifestly right, or they have enough of the details together, because traffic impact studies require a certain degree of construction document completeness that may not happen when they come to you. So is that just a cost that we're asking the applicant to bear and then the public to have to sift through, when in actuality we should leave that with the engineers and let them have that debate at a different channel? So it's a running discussion that's occurred over the years, is how much information is really required, or do we want to have it to be required as part of a complete application for the Planning Commission versus what do we want to have as a complete application for an administrative review?
Well, I think that the more complete an application is, the better, because a traffic impact study is actually important, and it's important for the public to be able to see it. And in recent things, there have been reports that have been provided that either planning commissioners or the public have pointed out that have been incorrect, or the conversation with staff is that there were some issues with it. So I think having the more people that we can have involved in the process who are going to actually be impacted by it is a helpful thing, not a hurtful thing, right? And so I would beg to differ that we don't get enough, or that that might have too much information, and that the process shouldn't involve all of these parties who will be ultimately affected by the end. So I guess when we're talking about this and when we're looking into it, I would like to explore that a little bit more, instead of cutting back on what we're getting, because I think what we're getting is, I'd actually like to see more, and I think some public would like to see more. So instead of cutting back on what we're getting, just thinking about the reasonableness of the time involved in everyone being able to, like I said, responsibly execute their role. And I don't know, that conversation is much longer than today.
Right.
But like that's, I'd like to be able to have that conversation.
In all fairness, it's also a discussion probably at the governing body level and not at this level.
Hey, Jeff, can I ask one last question, then we move on to the last, one other thing. So Commissioner Hayden mentioned that she, at Sunday night, had a bunch of questions before one of our meetings. And would that be a scenario where she could email all of us, or would that become like a joint meeting kind of? I mean, like it had to be public if that was a thing.
Yes, an email. If one commissioner was to email all the commissioners, that's a violation of the Open Meetings Act, and that would put the board in jeopardy on that one. So if you have questions, it's best to send it to Becky or myself, and then we will be able to kind of filter that out amongst the staff.
Okay.
We will send a response if it requires it, or it's something that we think you all need to have the information to. We will send it to everybody. But if the commissioners cannot correspond with each other in violation of open meetings unless it's under the thresholds.
All right, good.
That's where you have said, do not reply all.
Exactly, yes.
Right.
Maybe I have missed this again. If we are talking about 1 week earlier, changing the date from a Wednesday when it's finalized to a week earlier, and you're saying that changes the picture many, many more days and the cost for...
What you're not seeing is all the things that are going on in the back office. So for staff to be ready to post that week earlier, there's just a lot of back office stuff that is occurring that you don't see to get that document ready to be online.
But if it just was, guys, we're just changing this 1 week, it's for everyone knew that, I'm going to have to get my information in a week earlier, whether I'm the public, whether I'm the applicant, whomever. I don't see how that is, the deadline changes. This is what the new rules are. You have to get everything to us 1 week earlier. That people become used to that. Oh, well, I have to get that in 1 week earlier, don't I?
To give you an idea of what's going to happen there is, and Commissioner Duvar is indulging me here a little bit, is you're going to have people that aren't going to be working the normal business days. You're going to have people that are working fire shifts that may be on a Z shift and need an extra day or two to get to it. You're going to also see, is quite truthfully, the planners that come before you at Planning Commission, you're only seeing about 20% of their workload. There's another 80% of their workload going on behind the scenes that never comes to you. And so then all of that gets downshifted, and they have to do that work at the same pace at a different rate. So those reviews start to pile up. And then we've also got to make sure that we've got clearances to get, space to get the publication team in place to get your packet pushed up. Quite honestly, there are some places we will send information to that only meet once a week. So some townships may only meet once a week to have a discussion. And if they don't get it in the right cycle, then they're out of cycle. They may miss their comment altogether. So just by pushing it 7 days on your calendar does affect downstream quite a number of days when you start looking at how many reviewers we put in play on every application. So it's not just a move 7 here, pick up 7 there, because it doesn't correspond like that. And Commissioner Hayden's kind of hit the nail on the head. Even on a 60-day timeline with the amount of reviews and the cycle that we're in right now, it's tight for a planner to come in and get an application, get it through review, and get a staff report written in 60 days. I mean, that's already a tight timeline. If we push it 7 out, I think you're probably looking at even many more days before it would actually land on your desk for consideration.
What if you attacked it on the other end? Instead of making it the 4th Wednesday of a month, make it the 1st Wednesday of the month, so that you've just moved the meeting date forward a week.
That would probably conflict with one of the other boards that has this room on the first Wednesday.
Pardon me?
The other boards.
The other boards and commissions that take care of the room would have it on the first Wednesday. The only free day this room is really open is Friday evening. And I don't think I'm going to be able to convince staff to spend Friday evening in this room. Pretty hard to press. But, I mean, that's basically it. I mean, and Kurt will probably be able to vouch for this, from about 3 o'clock till 10 o'clock, Monday through Thursday, this room is in action. It is, yep.
So the bottom line appears to be you're going to get the information published the Wednesday before you meet on a Monday, period, the end.
It just depends on if you want to change the calendar and if the governing bodies also want to see that calendar change to go through. I mean, it's ultimately not a staff decision. We will make work with whatever the Planning Commission, the County Commission, the City Commission want to do. It's just there is a cost to the applicant on that one. There is a cost to staff on that one that we'd have to figure out and compensate for. But it's everything is possible. It's just a matter of how much time do we want to interject into the process.
If I could, I think that's right. In terms of this sort of level discussion about the calendar is definitely a policy decision because that gets into, how Lawrence Douglas County is perceived, writ large about the planning process. And if there are lots of costs to the applicant, barriers to applicants, and barriers to public comment, I mean, that's at the level of the commissions to decide what that calendar is going to look like, how much time the planning process writ large is going to take. And that gets into how much planning staff is available, how many planners are available. I think those are really big policy questions. And I just, I know this length of the meeting time is a big issue, but I think that it's being driven by 1 or 2 issues for the most part. And I think what's coming down the line is really going to help us. The consent agenda and the change in the land development code, I think, is really where we're going to see some changes in our meeting length. And I hate to see us spend all this time based on one or two issues about the meetings going late. I think we're going to see some changes coming up. Now, I think it's worth the discussion, at a higher level about the whole planning process and what that looks like. But for us, in the next few years, I think the change is going to come with those two very concrete things that can happen: the consent agenda and the change in the land development code. And I just hate to see us worry so much based on these one or two issues that have really dragged things out. And our packets are really big because we asked them to be big. We requested all this information to be given to us.
Right.
And so it's our responsibility, I feel. We asked for that information. It's our responsibility to make sure we review it.
With that being said, we are at 9 o'clock. So it was a good, lively discussion, but unfortunately, we've run out of time. So we'll have to continue if Becky will indulge us next time.
Can I actually?
Please, go ahead.
I wanted to, first of all, apologize for our late start and commissioners that had trouble getting on. I wanted to give Ellie some much due props. She fixed the issue. So next month and moving forward this year should not be an issue. You should have no trouble, those of you that want to join virtually, getting on that way. Thank you, Ellie. So next month, our topic for next month, we'll have the consultant that's helping with the land development code update will be joining us to give us further that discussion on that.
And that's the next 2 mid-months, is that right? Okay.
And development code, okay.
Okay.
All right. With that, we adjourn. Thank you, Ellie. Thank you, commissioners.
Thanks all.
Be sure to email me and let me